Thank you for joining us this afternoon for Textiles and Tea with the Handweavers Guild of America. I'm Erika Hewston, Program Coordinator here at HGA, and I will be your guest host today. Today's episode of Textiles and Tea is generously sponsored by Carol Irving, a beloved active member of HGA. We welcome your questions and will attempt to address as many as possible at the end of the program. Please remember to submit your questions using the Q&A button and not the chat button to be sure that we get to see them. Today, we are going to be joined by Geri Forkner. Geri creates mixed media art from her studio in Tennessee and is a longtime teacher to both children and adults. She created her own path through guild workshops, conferences, online classes, and at Georgia State University. She was awarded an Appalachian Craft and Culture Fellowship at Arrowmont School of Arts and Crafts and was the driving force behind the off-site exhibits at Convergence in Knoxville, Tennessee. Geri currently has two passions in her work: saving materials from the global scrap heap with small daily weavings started back in 2005, and trying to find the bottom of what she can with making with wet felting. Thank you for joining us, Geri. There you go.
There goes. Thank you for having me, and a big thank you to Carol too, for being the sponsor and taking a leap of faith.
Absolutely, and I don't think you'll disappoint. We are going to kick off today's episode with our standard question. What is your favorite tea?
Yeah, I'm a coffee drinker. To be honest, I usually have some celestial seasonings, Bengal spice around, but mainly I'm a coffee drinker. Good cup of iced tea when it's 98 degrees outside is always.
I can agree with that one.
Yeah, it's that hot in Atlanta too.
Oh, yes, yes. Well, how did you get started in fiber?
I ask my students that a lot of times, and there's very many of us that started with our mothers and grandmothers teaching us things. My grandmother and grandfather would come once a year in the summer on vacation, and one year she taught us to knit, and we knit these little 3-stitch wide bands, and the next summer she came and taught us to crochet doorknob covers. You can imagine how old that was. And I've just always made things. We used to get out of school to go to the Tennessee Valley Fair every year, and my mother would have us pet the sheep, and she'd say, "That's where your blanket comes from." And I never could figure out how it got from that rough, coarse, brownish looking sheet uh, to my blanket. But over the years, I did figure that out. So, I taught a lot of elementary school um, for a number of years. And then my husband got an early retirement and we moved from Atlanta to Tennessee. And so I decided to just focus on the fiber arts rather than, I was learning one of everything all those years and having a great time. Got involved with the guilds when we moved to Atlanta. I took all of their workshops. So it was just a progression. When we got to Tennessee, I pretty much focused, on teaching the fiber arts. So it's just, a progression and adding skills over a lifetime. Uh, I've run into people that sort of, taken a workshop that maybe want to apologize for taking one of everything, but that sure has worked for me. All those skills add up. And, if you're a young mother and driving kids to swim team and soccer practice, you just don't have time to focus on things. So it's just, the guild experience has been really valuable to me.
Well, that's great to hear. And you're so right. All of those different kinds of skills can totally cross-pollinate and affect the work that you're making. And you use several different types of felting. Which one or ones do you prefer in your work and why?
I just, I really got into Nuno felting and taught that for a number of years. Uh, I was asked to teach if I could teach a Nuno felting class at SAF one year, and I was sort of qualified, and so I said, "Wow, I've got a whole year to figure this out. I can do it." So I taught Nuno felting, and found just multiple different ways to do that. It's just basically adding a cloth layer, and and there's so many different ways you can do that, from solid structures to using it to gather the silk cloth. So, and I've been a weaver for a number of years. I started with weaving. So, it was just another tie into, I learned to spin. I took a lot of natural dyeing classes and, it just moved from one step to the next and kind of connecting the dots. So I did a lot of, got interested in weaving the cloth for Nuno felting, and that's led to a lot of different textures. I just think it's like a celebration of color and texture. So I've had, uh, you know, woven the cloth for yardage for the last three convergences, and that's been, really fun to challenge myself to do that because it shrinks 30 to 40%. So if you have to end up with 3 yards, you've got this gigantic 4 or 5 yard thing full of water that you're trying to deal with. So that's been a real challenge. And each year I've done one step lighter in that process. So there's just no end to the way you can do this. It's just I stay interested in it. I haven't found the bottom of it yet. I'm getting more interested in the three-dimensional felting now. You can see the fish. That's another step where I'm working more on the structure and developing that. Flat things work real well in my brain, but those three-dimensional things are another step. So I've been working on that most lately.
That sounds so exciting. Even just looking at this picture of the jacket and the beautiful ruffles that you've created with the Nuno felting, it's just so well executed. And I'm definitely going to have to look more into the pieces that you've made where you've also woven the fabric with the Nuno felting. That has got to make an awesome texture.
Thank you. Really, and I'm just a texture person, let's face it. So
I am right there with you. So that is pleasing to me, and I'm excited to learn more about your work here. So,
thank you.
We know that you've taught at the fashion design department at Ranks University in Bangkok, Thailand. How did you begin teaching there?
My son went to the Savannah School of Art and Design and got a master's in film. And he met several Thai people during the time he was there. And they said, well, come back to Bangkok with us for a year and we'll make a movie. Well, 20 years later, he's still there. So of course, I couldn't wait to go visit him the first because he's just going to be there for a year. And they invited me to come and teach a class. And I said, yeah, sure, this is really going to happen. But it did. And I've been doing that every year since. So it's been a little over 20 years. And that's just, these kids are wonderful. They're second year fashion design students. They're not scared of anything. They don't understand a word I say. I don't understand what they say. The teacher translates, and there's usually somebody in the class that can, knows English a little bit better. They have to take English in school. So, but the language is structured so differently. You can say a whole sentence in English and it makes no sense whatsoever. Uh, but they apparently love the colors of that wool as much as I do. And I give them a project and they just jump right in. There'll be 25 or in the class. And by the end of the day, they have a project with something, it's a hot climate. They've never heard of felting and wool, basically. So it's just a lot of fun, and that's evolved to where we do the workshop and then do a gallery show each year. And the kids put some of their work in, and then I put some of mine in. As
Because of that, because of that temperature, do you find that the focus is more on art pieces than just than on wearable pieces?
oh, well, you're getting into art now, so I have my own definition of
That's
art.
true. That's a
That-
very
That's
touchy word
it,
choice.
I sort of have my own definition of what art is to me, and sometimes I make art, and sometimes I make craft. But
And they
when I,
can often be both. So I think maybe what I meant to
well,
say was like more like a decorative, like a wall piece versus a wearable piece.
I did a whole project on that when I had a little studio in this wannabe tourist town when we first moved out to the country. And people would come in and they wouldn't see placemats and they wouldn't know what to do and they'd leave. And I came to the realization that you can weave a placemat and hang it on the wall and call it a piece of art, and then it's important.
That's true.
Then it goes from $20 to $150. So I've developed my own definition of what art is for my work, but I want
And that
craft part to be to a high standard. I've looked at pieces in galleries where I'm not sure whether they didn't understand the mechanics of how to make that piece or that was part of the work.
right.
Was that uh, so organic that you didn't know whether they had control over it or not. And I want to know that they had control and chose that. So,
Right. And that could be a whole nother
oh
conversation
yeah,
for
yeah.
sure. But you had also mentioned the show at Ranks University. Do you find that you have a lot of pressure getting work ready by then? Do you make pieces specifically for that show, or do you compile work that you've already
Uh,
made?
that's actually been very liberating because they let me make whatever I want. I can put up, whatever I want, and so there's a freedom, and I can express ideas. Uh, and that is another part that's evolved because I've done it for a number of years. For the first several years, I would put up whatever I had made during the year. And then one year I thought I had made these huge, gigantic pieces, and I put them up in the gallery and they just like disappeared. So I started thinking of how I could make, fill up that space and how I can pack that in a 50-pound suitcase and get it there. So it's just really been a lot of my learning process. And there are times when I have done uh, installation pieces that had themes to them. This is, obviously about fish and a lot of different pieces that I had made. There's some photographs in there with some stitching. So, that part has, they're so trusting that I'm going to put up good work, apparently. And they come and see it. We do an opening, and I know that the teachers make those students come to the opening. So they'll come in and they'll walk in a circle and walk right back out again. So I started doing interactive pieces that required them to participate in the show and make a comment on a piece in a specific way. The figures that you showed, that's what I'm working on now. The ones that are behind me have press switches in them in the hands so that when you, join hands with those characters, they will light up in some way. So I don't know if that answered the question or not, but
Absolutely, absolutely. And how do you feel like your work has changed after traveling and teaching over there in Bangkok?
that a lot of that, is that process of how these exhibits have evolved. I have the opportunity to, do whatever I want. And so I spend a lot of time getting ready for it. So then I have to, when I have an idea, I have to make the pieces for it, and I have to make those pieces work and look good. So and having that guaranteed show every year, it's just a matter of working all the time and making something all the time, and your work is bound to improve and to grow. But, Bangkok, the whole Thailand is just this big country of eye candy everywhere you look. And that, I'm sure that's influenced how much I like color and texture
Oh, I'm
as
sure. And did I read that you have woven every day for 20 years? Can you share with us how that started, and more importantly, how do you maintain that?
that's, you know, I was in my studio one day and I said, gee, I think I'll make a weaving and see if I can make a little 3-inch square weaving every day. Maybe I'll do this for a month. So a month got by and I kept working on it, and another month went by, and then I just finally got filled up the whole year. And then I decided, well, I haven't woven everything I could possibly weave. I'd pick up stuff on my walks, uh, and put in the weavings. And I I don't know, things weren't going right one day. I was in this really bad mood, so I picked up all this black tar paper stuff I could find somebody had thrown out, and I have no idea what I was angry about that day, but it's just things like that what I pick up. The picture that you're looking at uh, is one I've done in the past 2 or 3 years. This is on the farm. We moved from Atlanta to out in the middle of nowhere where my husband grew up, and I walk in these woods every day. And I have gotten to where I'm sewing them in strips by months. And I was sitting in those woods one day, and it just looked like that linear nature was like what I had been weaving, and how these strips have been hanging. So I put them in the woods. I'm just very involved in nature. I think just, that's another influence from because I live out in the country. There's always something different in the woods. It's really amazing. So I had different themes for these weavings every year. For the first number of years since the pandemic, I've just, at one point in the beginning of that pandemic, I started making much smaller weavings. I just felt very diminished by having, this isolation and losing all the teaching jobs and traveling. And so, pretty much since the pandemic, I've just been making these very small weavings. I never made a commitment to weave something for 20 years. I just did this on a whim, and it has turned into this. I've showed these a number of times. Tommy Scanlon included me in her new book, Marking Time with Fabric and Thread. So just when you do something for 20 years, I've been fortunate enough to show these several times. I'm very surprised. The first time I showed one, I was very surprised that people even looked at it. And, a young couple was looking at it, and apparently I must have used the same kind of toothpaste they did or something. And they were, finding different things in it. And it never occurred to me that it was going to be a project. Uh, there was a guy, I'm probably going to mispronounce his name, Simon Rhodey, built the Watts Towers in Los Angeles. He spent about 40 years building those things. And one day he said, I'm done. And he left and, never went back. And, I feel like someday I'm going to say I'm done, but that hadn't happened yet. There's still things I haven't woven. I'm surprised that I will pick up something and say, boy, I've never done this before. So it just started on a whim, and 20 years later, there it is.
I love how that is just naturally evolved for you over time, and it seems like such a great way to incorporate play in your weaving and having that regular practice. We've got a detail shot of 365 here, and you're known for weaving with recycled materials, like we can see the combs here. How did you get inspired to pursue that?
I think a lot of that came from leaving Atlanta, where I had access to big guilds and shops that sold yarn, and living out in the country where I had to go to Walmart if I wanted, materials, and made a great weaving out of Q-tips one time. That was part of uh, the placemat project. I told you I wove a whole set of placemats with cut up soda bottles and, aluminum and plastic soda bottles and tea bags and anything I could find. And then, I'd find cast off stuff when I'd walk. I picked up a lot of metal. 2 or 3 years I was into picking up any kind of metal that I found laying around. Uh, I made a weaving many years ago just out of everything I picked up on a walk. And somebody had thrown out a bunch of little ketchup packages from Hardee's. And, put them in the weaving and cigarette butts and showed it. I think at the Weavers Guild in Atlanta, and somebody bought it, which just kind of blew my mind. And done a lot of coffee bag weavings. I did the bicycle vest for the fashion show in Knoxville, but I've been weaving with coffee bags. They're lined with shiny aluminum foil like stuff and big heavy plastic, and I just figured there had to be something else to do with that rather than throw it away. So I've done a lot of yardage just with coffee bags. I
That's a
spiral cut them in one big strip, and so the pattern will crawl off because the repeat of the coffee bag is not the same as the width of the warp. So you can get that design. I tried to plan that one time. I had to make so many samples to make that work. But, several of the coffee bags just made these beautiful designs with that crisscrossed because of the way, the size was different. Uh, uh, that's I hope people understand that. I'm sure there's books written on how to do that technique.
I love hearing that. And that's such a cool crossover between your daily weavings and like your larger pieces where you're still collecting these little things here and there on your travels, whether here or abroad. And we see that you travel often, and I wonder what's true for you. When you're traveling, do you plan your trips around specific experiences, or do you just stumble upon fiber experiences when you're there?
And I look for tours that include weaving and fiber arts that take you to places that I can't get to on my own, where they have relationships with weavers. The picture that you're looking at is we did weaving, actually that's inside Canyon de Chelly, which is this incredible place. And we had two Navajo women were the teachers, and we sat there in those rocks. There's only two families that live in that canyon now. There's no running water, electricity. And the sisters had grown up in that canyon. And this was the first time that they had been back since COVID. And it was just this amazing experience to sit there and weave in that canyon. So I look for trips like that. I really like ones that include workshops. I'm a terrible shopper. Uh, so, but I look for, a very good example of uh, what's traditional for that country. So I'm really traveling to find those textiles. My son and I, for many years when he first moved there, we would search out, uh, weavers and spinners and the traditional. We had some "you're not in Kansas" moments on those trips. We'd be out, riding motorcycles. I don't know if I ever told my husband that I rode on the back of motorcycles. But we'll be riding into this little tiny village on the back of motorcycles, and my son's pulling out his cell phone. Just all kinds of interesting experiences like that. But, a lot of the tour leaders that you go on can take you to these places, but they're not weavers. So I was able to ask my son grew up seeing a weaver, so he was able to ask the weaver specific questions. I'm just, fascinated by how simple those looms are and the intricate things that they weave on them. It's, their treadles are sitting on the ground. I've just had these incredible experiences. Do we have another 3 hours? I can talk about all of them. There's some excellent tours out there that take you into uh, very beautiful weaving places. I use the textiles. I have a collection of garments now. I did a residency with fourth graders in my county for a number of years, and would dress those kids up in these textiles. I had collections from different countries, and that was sort of my cultural lesson. Uh, because it was in the school, so we could talk about math and English and all of those things. I would throw those little things in because it was in the classroom. And they loved, I have a sari, and they absolutely loved trying that on as this bright, beautiful, colorful thing. So, uh,
And
yeah, I
what a lovely way
traveled.
to introduce, what a wonderful way to introduce all of those different cultures to the students as well.
Hmm. Thank you.
So you are also well known for including lights in your fiber work, as seen here. Would you talk about how you started using lights and how you learned to apply LED to your fiber?
That there is a camp for grown-ups called Shake Rag. It comes up for 2 weeks in the summer. It's near Chattanooga, Tennessee. It's just a couple hours for me. And it's in a residential high school. And the teachers get together and they say, what is the best pottery teacher and the best any teacher, surface design, painting, and they are sort of committed to having one of the classes as a tech class. So they had a class, in electronic textiles, and it just sounded very interesting to me. Uh, I happened to be teaching at John Campbell Folk School, and I was teaching felting, and there was a well-known weaving teacher that was there teaching in a different classroom, and I asked her about it, and she said, well, they don't have a product yet. Well, I couldn't find anything about electronic textiles, but there is so much information out there now, and you're just seeing it in so many places. And it's just something that's fascinating to me. Uh, this picture on the left is, and that's made out of coffee bags. It has a little computer in it I went to college in slide rule days. Programming computers is beyond me. I keep trying to learn it. Uh, it is beyond me, but what you see uh, is a computer called a lily pad, and you can write programming, you can write code to tell those lights that you see in the middle what to do. And so there's getting to be more information. There are companies out there that invent this equipment. It comes from the really sophisticated things that we have in our cell phones. It's been in the medical and the military for a long time. And so now it's down where it's accessible to ordinary people like me that can't write code. But I can cut and paste some code, so I was able to do enough to program those lights so that they blink 10 times on one side and then blink 10 times on the other side. And eventually, and I did not want to put press switches in them. You can. This is one of the classic projects. If you start looking up electronic textiles, you'll probably run across a bike jacket at some point. Uh, I just, I didn't want to ask the models to do one extra step. So you can put press switches in it so that if you are actually riding a bicycle, I made a novelty one. I didn't make one I expected somebody to wear. And then the picture on the right, the little bells when they cross that copper grid make the lights come on. So there's just very many ways to just use a simple LED. And I've done a lot of projects just using, not even a press switch, just with lights on them. It's another way to get people to come in and look closer at your work. But part of that fascination is, to me, is getting more girls into engineering. I think that many children these days are taking some sort of a coding class, middle school, elementary school, even. They're very accessible programs to learn for kids to learn how to code, but most of what they're doing is working towards robotics. And so they're, getting into the fashion design where you add a sensor that when you move, the lights come on. That's got to be or a tie, your necktie to wear to the prom that's got lights that blink on them. There's just something about the fashion design, that I feel like might be more interesting to girls. That's probably a prejudice thing to say, but it's just the other thing is the fascination with me. There's a lot of collaboration that goes on. This first class that I took, we worked in pairs, and I was paired with this like 6'3" a young man from Africa that was at the nearby college studying engineering. And all he was interested in was opening this box and having it say something. And he knew how to write that code. And he made this really crude box out of just, whatever paper was lying around. So my job then was to take that box and make that box look beautiful. So there's a lot of collaboration involved in that. And then the idea of the fashion design student brains working with the engineering people's brains is just sort of, you know, there's just got to be something about that I the opposite kinds of brains working together. So that's kind of
I am
is.
I am thoroughly impressed. As somebody who's not super tech savvy myself, I think that this is incredible. And it sounds like this work that you're doing with the students, I look forward in the future to like seeing these little fashion people pop up that credit you for inspiring their light infused fashion designs. I think it's going to
Thank
be
you.
incredible.
Thank you. That's my wildest dreams. Thank you.
Yeah, I think it can happen. Next up here, we've got clothesline. Am I to assume that this work would be considered an installation and that the environment is part of the work? And would you talk about this?
That is at my farm. That is a picture taken out from my back porch. And, we're always trying to clean out and reduce our stash, our junk. And, I had all this stuff that I'd been dragging around for years that I couldn't give away. Nobody wanted it. And I decided I was going to hang it outside and let it go back to nature. And, we had this structure. My son built this for to use, put his car in at one point, and he wasn't using it. So, uh, he hauled it up there for me, and I hung old textiles that I didn't want anymore out there to see what was going to happen. And I photographed it on and off for a year. I didn't photograph it daily because I do travel. So you're looking at it in two different seasons. uh, it gradually became a clothesline. I didn't have that in mind in the beginning, and somebody was visiting one day and said, "Oh, I like your clothesline." And so then and connecting the dots is always something that I want to work towards that I'm not very good at. But when I travel, if you read a tour book, they say, well, we're going to take you to the real part of this country, and you're not going to go to just the tourist part. So to me, the real part of a country is the clotheslines. I've like taking pictures of shadows. I've been taking pictures of clotheslines because that's just, I see them all over the world. And that's sort of the real part of the country to me. So it became a clothesline, and I photographed it, and just as a coincidence, the last day of that year was the day of the eclipse, and we had 5 minutes of totality where we lived. So that was auspicious. Is that the right word? I don't know. But that was my exhibit in Bangkok that year. So I ran a slideshow of the pictures that I had taken during the year. And I took some of those pictures and printed them and embellished them with some embroidery and free motion machine stitching. And I hung those on the wall. And that one of those pictures you showed in the very beginning was a little organza piece. They're just about this big. And so I printed those on organza and embellished those. And I hung those, like they were a clothesline. And yeah, that's the piece. So those are, just little small. There were 6 or 8 of those. They're from the pictures that I took. So there, I filled the whole gallery with these different things. And then I found that I still had quite a few textiles I wasn't able to use. And I cut them up and stitched them together in little bundles. I had been on a trip to Peru, and they took us to an alpaca blessing ceremony way, way up at high altitude. In Alta Alta. It was fascinating. And they brought out this big bundle, and it had items in it that some of them were 100 years old. So I made these into bundles, and I put little cards by them, and I asked the people that saw the exhibit to pick a bundle and write a little response to what inspired them, the color or the texture, how they would use that as a starting point. And then they pinned the little signs up on a board, a bulletin board like that we had there. So that was, one of my opportunities to make an installation piece uh, in that gallery.
I love the community aspect there and drawing the viewers in.
It's nice to be able to do that. Yeah. Been fortunate. I've done several like that. My daughter, I have four children. One of my daughters is a scientist. She got a PhD, and she collected 6,000 bottles of bugs. And
Wow.
when you have, that's part of the scrap things that, I've used. And when you have 6,000 of something, it's not a bug bottle anymore. They're about 2 inches. They're not very big. And, I made a felted piece out with those bottles in it, but I put the bottles back out in the yard and throughout the farm, and was playing with the irony of, these bugs are back in nature where they came from, but they're trapped inside these bottles. And I made a whole labyrinth out of, because I had thousands of them. So uh, part of that got started back in those early days in Tellico Plains. There were shirt factories there, and one was closing down, and I got 20 or 30 boxes of shirt labels, those little labels that go in the back of your shirt. And there were 500 labels in each one. So it became something, a material rather than a shirt label. And I made bowls and garments out of those shirt labels. So those are, just ways of collecting things and using them in some way. So I guess I'm inspired by materials as much as anything.
Yeah, and just collecting and repurposing those. It sounds like you just like to explore. Do you find that you experiment more than you make completed projects?
Because I teach, that's the main thing that I do. I'm never, got into selling. I'm terrible at selling. So I would try to sell my work and try to teach, and I always got teaching jobs first. So, uh, and I will design a workshop. I have a year or a year and a half to get ready and pick some subject that I want to explore more personally. So then I make samples for those projects. So I think it's more about exploring and making the samples. Uh, I'd hate for 3-year-olds to rub off on me, but I did teach 3-year-olds, and they just want to make the thing. They could care less about it when it's done. And I guess I'm more into making them and experimenting them. We had a lecture in Atlanta from a Japanese woman, and she said, in Japan, it's how much you suffer to make a piece of art. And in the United States, it's how much fun you have. So that's kind of always stuck with me. I enjoy the process and solving the problems. All weavers are problem solvers, whether you think you are or not. So
Well, I think if you're gonna have 3-year-olds rub off on you, that's probably the best way to have it happen.
thank you.
So what do you think is next for you?
I think chickens are next for me. I made all those fish, so and I'm getting into three-dimensional felting and what you can do with resist. So I think I might try and make some chickens next or some birds. I'm got several teaching jobs coming up. I'm teaching at MAFA coming up real soon, and that's how you get your convergence fix every other year is by going to some of the regional conferences. And I've got some teaching jobs coming up. Got some plans to travel this summer as well. So I have a list this long of projects I want to do. I have some friends that are storytellers. And, we were having lunch at my house one day and they looked at these guys on the wall and they immediately came up with jobs and backstories and names for them. They're mainly a collection of all the small pieces that I've made and the experiments I've made. And all of a sudden they came together and started looking like people. So that's on the list. Uh, there's a lot on my list.
It sounds like it. It sounds like you're going to be very busy. And I am so excited to see these chickens. I feel like this is going to be a silly thing to say, but I feel like chickens are in right now.
Oh, good. Good.
You're going to have to start raising some chickens too on the farm if you
Yeah,
don't
we
already.
we tried that. We tried that. There were too many enemies that
They can
got
be
them.
pricey.
It's not that simple, but making a chicken is not that simple either because it has to balance on feet. Fish you can just hang on the wall and hang from a string and watch it turn, but so all kidding aside, there are all kinds of ways of using resist to make these fascinating shapes that you could never figure out. So that's where that idea is coming from.
I have faith in you. I think you'll have it sorted out in no time.
Thank you.
We do have some great questions from the audience, so I'm going to pull some of those up here. We've got a couple people asking what kind of loom you use for your daily weavings.
I do not use a loom. They're all paper. Basically, there's all kinds of materials in them. Um, there are times when I cut 3-inch squares out of, you can get discarded mat board at frame shops, and I'll just wind a yarn around that. So, but the ones that you see, there's a comb there in the middle of the picture, but the ones that you see on either side of that are just ones that looks like a photograph, and I cut them in strips and weave them back into themselves, and I stitch them together on the sewing machine. So there's no loom involved in this at all.
That is awesome. Okay, so very free form on those dailies. We love that
Yeah.
experimentation. We've also got some felt processing questions. Are the sculpted pieces needle felted, or do you also use wet felting in there?
I'm exclusively a wet felter. I don't
Okay.
do any needle felting at all. There's a rare occasion that I will, attach something that's not sticking properly with a needle. I'm exclusively a wet felter.
And you get so much detail using wet felting. That's impressive.
There's a lot of, you'd be amazed at the kinds of shapes that you can get, three-dimensional shapes. I really admire people that can needle felt, to get a face that's that detailed, is just not something I'm ever going to be able to do. But I just do not want to do needle felting. I think you can get many of the needle felted shapes that I've seen using different kinds of resist. So that's my challenge.
Okay. Well, speaking of resist, somebody else was asking how you use those resists in your felting.
Any kind of plastic is a resist. So if you're making a pocketbook and you don't want you lay out the wool and you don't want the front and the back to stick together, you have to put a piece of plastic or we're using floor underlay a lot. You put that in between the layers so they don't stick. So if you want to make a fish, then you make a fish-shaped resist. If you want to make a chicken, you make a chicken-shaped resist. But there are also ways of layering resists. So if you're not a felter, a lot of times you don't have any kind of reference to it at all. So it's really confusing to try to understand that. I hope that answered their question.
Yeah, I think that that was a great little insight into using resist in felting. We've also got a question, well, we've got a couple questions about the lights in the woven work. So we've got somebody interested in knowing what the weaving pattern is, where the lights and the bells are hooked into the fabric.
Uh, that's a deflected weave.
Okay,
Um,
and is it a string of beads that's just woven in there then, or are the beads placed individually?
I sewed the beads on after I wove it.
Okay.
And they have to be sewn with conductive yarn so that you make the circuit. So the beads are strung probably on wire, and then they make yarn that is conductive, so that as you sew it it's like an embroidery floss, and you can stitch with it, but it conducts electricity. So the lights are stitched with that conductive thread, and then the beads are on wire, and then there's conductive thread stitching that to make the circuit.
Okay. So then we've got somebody, and I think this ties into that, that's asking about when you have this all set up, do you use a battery with the conductive threads?
Yes, yeah. Most of what I do is with the 3 volt, those little round 3 volt coin
Ah,
cell batteries. I don't have one sitting here right now. It's a very standard little battery. I'm hoping to go to rechargeable and solar cells and things like that. And not put that many batteries in the landfill, but for now, those are the best things to work with. And uh, I believe you're having somebody next week that's more into electronics, maybe, if I looked her up properly. I'm doing very simple classes just to introduce people to here are the supplies that you use, and here's how you stitch a basic circuit. And I don't feel qualified to start
yeah,
teaching computer programming or other things, but there are many people out there that can do that. And it's just a whole fascinating field.
absolutely. Gail's wondering if you can share where you find conductive thread.
Uh, there are two companies. One is called Adafruit. It's Adafruit. And the other is called Spark Fun, SPARKFUN. And those are the main places I get things. And both of them, when you search their websites, you will find uh, an e-textile section that has the materials. They sell their switched battery holders. There's a lot of materials out there that you can find. Adafruit has the most, and they have so many tutorials and so many fun projects that you can do. I really recommend them. Started by a woman electrical engineer. She calls herself Lady Ada because that was the first computer person. So
Oh, I love that. I love that. We've got Christine Williamson that is just itching for you to tell us more about the characters hanging on the wall behind you.
they are, all those samples that I made, th- I come from a really talented family. They're way more talented than I am. And my cousins were visiting, uh, and her husband is a art professor. He taught at Rice for a number of years in Texas. And, he's used to looking at a lot of art and advising students and everything. He was playing with all of these, was bringing out these textured pieces. I have tons of them. Uh, Most of them are this weaving for felt because I've been experimenting with that for a long time. And he was just moving them around. And he said, well, if you put these guys like this, it almost looks like a person. And I've never done, I just uh, would have to learn to draw. It does not come naturally to me. And I never took that time to learn to draw. We had a great craft program in middle school when I was growing up. And that's what I was good at. My sister was good at drawing. So everything I do is these linear strips and geometric. Weaving is parallel threads crossing each other for the most part. Uh, so I've done multiple experiments and I just started moving these pieces around and making these people out of them. That's the first, people that I've made, the first representational stuff. And it's just so much fun to make them. I did, they were one of my installations in Bangkok. And, I placed them on the wall and just asked people to join hands with them and, light up the world, something kind of corny. But I like the idea that, they're not, that they're a diverse group, that they're not all the same and they're multiple colors and Sesame Street characters. I don't know, but they're fun to play with. I've mastered the press switches for turning lights on them, and my next uh, thing that I want to do is to, figure out how to uh, have them make sound, maybe to record a story. Uh, and push a button and it plays that story back of who that person is. So they're just a whole lot more to explore with them. And then I get to use up all the projects that I've been making all these years. They have beads on them that I've, made all kinds of beads out of felt. Just everything I've ever made, all of a sudden I have a use for it. So that's been another whole journey.
They
They're
have so
just
much
for fun.
personality.
They are just for fun.
Yeah, they're amazing. How many people do you have? How many figures do you have at
I've
this point?
got about 8 right now, but I made a new one the other day, and then I found a much more efficient way to make a press switch. So I've been working on redoing that. That's another little recycle thing. Uh, the milk bottles. We get these half-gallon almond milk bottles, and they have a little pull tab that you pull to open them. That makes a great press switch because it stays open and it's plastic and it works great. So, I'm recycling everything, the textiles and the press switches. It's just, I guess things are, all those dots are starting to come together. And that's another goal is connect of mine that I'm constantly working on is connecting the dots.
You've got a great theme going throughout your work. I think I've got time to squeeze one more quick question in here from Marcia Polk, who just is curious about the size of the weavings with the combs.
Most of, they're mostly in the 3-inch square range. That's a very small comb. Most of them are uh, sort of, I did one year where I used the whatever, over the last 20 years I've been doing this, there is a lot less mail that is coming in, and a lot of the beginning things were mail. And so I would get, a card advertising a show or some other advertisement, fold it in half and tear it and weave it back into itself. And that was the largest group that I made. And there were, that was huge, but lately they're all within a 3-inch, the sort of 3-inch square. They're small, they're 2 minutes, some of them, 5 minutes. Uh, it's just something that you do. It's not something to worry about or think about. No matter how unproductive a day I've had, I have at least made one thing, even if it's 2 minutes. So,
Which is wonderful. I'm so glad that we got to that question actually, because in my mind, I think I was picturing around like 6 inches. So knowing that all of those are half
yeah,
that size, it's so much more
there, some
detailed.
of them have been, but lately they're all, that's a kind of a rough estimate.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much, Geri, for joining us today and being on Textiles and Tea. It's been a pleasure.
Thank you. I appreciate your having me, and thank you, HGA, and all of your amazing staff, and and a special thanks to Carol for being a sponsor.
Absolutely. And you can learn more about Geri on her website at weavingschool.wordpress.com. And special thanks, like she said, to Carol Irving for sponsoring today's episode of Textiles and Tea. If you would like to sponsor an episode of Textiles and Tea, you can learn more at weavespindye.org. Textiles and Tea is supported by our generous donations. If you would like to see more programming, please support HGA by becoming a member or donating. You can join and give on our website at weavespindye.org. If you missed part of this episode, would like to watch it again, or share it with a friend, Textiles and Tea is recorded and can be viewed on HGA's Facebook page, or you can subscribe to our YouTube channel where you can view the entire series and more. Please join us next week when we share tea with Victoria Manganello. Thank you and happy tea.